Thank you very much, Lisa. Can you hear me at the back? Excellent, good. Um, this is a significant photo. This is taken by a diver. They'd spent a week of doing advanced trimix diving out in Malta, and this is a Schnell boat, this is a torpedo tube that sits on the side of this fast patrol boat, sits in about 63 meters, and they'd done a number of 65, 70-meter dives during this week. And this was taken just before they ascended. The pair ascend, they do their decompression, and they get back on the boat. And the photographer takes off his dive gear and starts to get visual disturbances, like a aura from migraine. No previous history of aura or migraine in the past, and after about 20 minutes it disappears. No other signs of neurological or physical symptoms of decompression sickness. So about half an hour later, they arrive in the quayside at Valletta and they start unloading the boat. Now, from sort of previous research, peak bubbling happens about 30 minutes after surfacing. So here we go. We'll start with a major strenuous activity, lifting the cylinders off the rib onto the quayside and then lifting the twin sets onto the flatbed truck. And as the diver picks up the twin set and lifts it onto the back of the truck, they have a lot of visual disturbances at this stage. And in relation, they said, I think I've got a PFO. But they didn't say anything to anybody in the team. They got, say, a lot of visual disturbances, but they got no other signs and symptoms of decompression sickness. No tingling, no muscle, or anything else like this. So they didn't say anything to anybody. They were flying home the following day back to the UK. And they sat there and went, I'm not going to go and say anything. About an hour later, all the symptoms cleared up. And they flew home the following day. And then in conversation with a surgeon in Bristol, they found out they've got a PFO, an 8mm by 12mm PFO. That diver was me. Now, interestingly, we're going to talk about how people make risk-based or uncertainty-based decisions. Because I'm sure quite a few of you thought, what an idiot. Why didn't he say something to the rest of the team? Because there's obviously something that's going on and should be said. Now, it was my girlfriend was out there on holiday with us. That's my best mate, and we were flying home the following day. I didn't want to scare my girlfriend by saying, I think I've been bent. And then we would end up in the chamber getting treated, which meant we weren't going home the following day, which meant it was all going to go horribly wrong. So I was really lucky, but I was making lots of what people would say risk-based decisions, but they're not. That's how those risk-based decisions get taken in the real world. Wet finger in the air, because we can't measure a lot of the stuff that we talk about. And that's what I'm going to go through this presentation. I don't have the answers for you, because a lot of this, in fact, all of it, is your own risk perception and your acceptance of the risks that you take. But what I'm going to try and get across to you is that most of the time we don't make logical based decisions when we talk about uncertainties. It's about emotions, mental shortcuts, mental models, and those are fallible. But if we understand how we make those failures or those failed decisions, it'll put you in a better place to make decisions. So I was expecting a much bigger screen. Here we go, it's an assumption. And that I'd be able to put this up here and you could read it. So I'm going to do it instead. To try is to risk failure. But risks must be taken because the greatest hazard in life is to risk nothing. The person who risks nothing, does nothing, has nothing, is nothing. He may avoid suffering and sorrow, but he cannot learn, feel, change, grow, or live. Chained by his servitude, he is a slave who has forfeited all freedom. Only a person who risks is free. The pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, and the realist adjusts the sails. We all take part in a high-hazard environment. We cannot breathe underwater without mechanical assistance. We may love what we do, and people would say, he died or she died doing what they love. I don't think so somehow. Plus, there is those people that you leave behind. And that's what I'm going to address as we go through this. Not just you, but also failing safely so others are kept safe. So risk in 1983, or prior to that, the Royal Society did some research and they published this definition of risk that said the probability that a particular adverse event occurs during a stated period of time or results from a particular challenge. As a probability in the sense of statistical theory, risk obeys all the formal laws of combining probabilities. 3 years later, they wrote another paper that basically got rid of that because risk has different meanings. It could be a hazard. What are the risks that we should rank? It could be a probability. What's the risk of having a PFO? About 25% for most people. And when you're on normal, 1 atmosphere life, a PFO is not a problem, apart from a small risk for strokes. As a consequence, what's the risk of not analysing my gas? Well, I could have an oxtox. I could go hypoxic. I might have decompression issues because it's not got the same level of oxygen that I thought. It could be as an adversity or a threat. How great is the risk of getting decompression sickness? Well, that's a proper wet finger in the air, and we'll talk about that in a bit more in detail. And the other bit is context specific. So in the UK, it gets cold in winter, or it does when I grew up as a kid up in Scotland. It would snow, and we would make icy slides on the pavement. As kids, awesome. As the old people walking around the village, thanks. You've now risked my life by falling over, breaking my hip, and dying as a consequence. So what we take is very context specific. Diving, if you go to non-divers and say, I'm going to go back several kilometers into a cave system and it's submerged too, and they go, what? Why would you do that? Because it's awesome. Or I go into a wreck and take photos of an engine room with all the percolation coming down. Why would you do that? Because it's there. And we need to understand that risk is personal from that point of view. But risk is sort of the opposite of safety. And this quote comes from a guy called Todd Conklin, does a lot of research and practice in the States when it comes to high-risk industry safety. And safety is not the absence of incidents or accidents, but the presence of barriers and defenses and the ability of the system to fail safely. So in terms of barriers and defenses, what we're talking about, system design that takes into account human fallibility, that we have displays that work well, that the controls deal with human interfaces. Technical skills in the context of flying, uppy, downy, lefty, righty. Cows get big, cows get small. In terms of the surgeons, it's about suturing or incising or doing whatever surgeons do, trying not to kill the patient in the process. That's their technical skills. In terms of diving, it's propulsion, it's buoyancy, it's about laying line, it's about shooting photos and videos. Those are technical skills. Then we talk about non-technical skills, soft skills or human factors, decision-making, teamwork, leadership, situational awareness, communications. That's a lot of the stuff that I teach. Attitude. What's your attitude towards risk? And whether or not you want to fail or not. And that point is, if you are not willing to go out there and fail, you won't explore and you won't develop as a person or as a team. And then knowledge and experience are critical to understanding how to make effective decisions. If you've never experienced something, you cannot make a sound decision. But that's common sense. Yeah, okay, it's common sense for you because you experienced it and you know what it's like. Has that person ever encountered that situation before? No. So how would they know that that's the right decision? And then we talk about failing safely on the other side, having non-technical skills and human factors again, how to make effective decisions in stressful situations. In terms of diving, bailouts and contingencies, planning and practicing. Then we talk about medical kit on the boat or on the shore. Yeah, if you've got an emergency, O2 kit is essential. How many people have oxygen kits with them when they go diving? I'll put my hand up and say I don't unless I'm on a boat. And yet I still expose myself to those risks. How often do you go and practice emergency drills or go training? A couple of my human factors students this week spent a couple of days in Chepstow doing bailout drills from 60 meters. And one of them wrote me an email this morning and said, it was rubbish. It wasn't very good at all, but we learned as a team about what to do. And we, as a consequence, we understood where we failed. And we've got to have that reflection. And then the final piece that I'm going to cover right at the end of the day, insurance and life assurance. Because you can do as much as you can to prevent something going wrong, but ultimately, the ultimate failure is somebody dies. How do you fail safely in that context? So perceived risks. This was from a paper written by a guy called Slovich that looked at risks in context of big threats, mainly about nuclear and chemical attack warfare and things. But in here he talked about how people ranked, and this goes down to 30, but I only tick the top ones here. So nuclear power, normal people, let me go this way. Normal people think that nuclear power is really risky. The experts, 20 out of 30, because it's really well managed. And then we go down. Experts consider motor vehicles as the biggest risks that are out there. And yet we just drive and take it for normal. I've got a coach who learned how to dive in the Caribbean on a cruise liner. In the back of the boat, at the back of the liner, they did their confined water for DSDs. Her first dive was to 30 meters on a 500-meter wall. It was a shark dive. It was advertised as a shark dive, and they were only sort of 2 or 3 meters. Most people were scared about the sharks, and they weren't going to go and do the dive. And yet she ended up at 30 meters going, oh, this is cool. Oh, wow, look at this. Off her face on narcosis, and the guide was going like this. No, we've got to go. And ended up having to be held at her sort of 5-meter stop because she'd completely forgotten what she was supposed to do. The perception of risk was, sharks are scary. Oh, really? And that deep water isn't? Because she put her trust in the guides to keep her safe. So our perception of risk drives what we go looking for. And I've shown this in a couple of other presentations I've given, this concept of incompetent and unaware, the Dunning-Kruger effect. And what they did was they, in the 90s actually, they ran a number of experiments looking at how people thought they did in terms of exams. And they ran 4 exams, and these are from grammar and logical reasoning. And this line here, this is what people thought they scored when they were asked immediately after the exam. And most people were in the sort of 60 to 70% band. That's what they thought they scored overall. This is what the novices did. On average, they scored around it and they broke it into quartiles. The bottom quartile, 15 to 16%. That's what they actually scored, and yet they thought they scored up here. The same across on this side. And this is repeatable in lots of places. And the problem is, when you're incompetent, in a technical sense, you're hit by a double negative, really. One, you're incompetent, you don't know what you don't know. And even worse, you don't know that you don't know. So you sit there and go, yeah, I'm great, I know this. You go, no, you have no idea the gap in your knowledge that's here. Now, it also hits the experts at the top end of the graph, because these people, they underestimated their capabilities. They scored much higher compared to what they thought. And they're also sitting there going, why are these people so stupid? Because they've forgotten what it's like to be a novice. And they don't know what those people don't know. So when you judge people based on outcomes, you know what the outcome is. So as we'll go through a lot of these, there are biases that are there that don't help us judge uncertainties and behaviors. So this model here comes from healthcare, and I'll expand on it a bit later on. But what we have is basically what's considered safe is the outside boundary here. And then we have this margin, this dotted line on the inside that basically says we have an error. And we'll blow this up and say, well, actually, this is what our actual performance is, this white triangle here. And then this is what a high-performing team show what their performance is like. They assess themselves to be quite close to what their real performance is. The not-so-competent organizations, they don't know how good they are, conversely, how bad they are. So they sit potentially over a failure line. And we've got to understand how well we really do. And that comes through feedback and debriefs. If we don't look back in detail of how we did something, we make the assumption that everything was okay. We judge on outcomes, not on process. And part of this book here, if you want to learn a bit about risk and how rubbish we are at dealing with this sort of thing, is worth reading. It's not a very long read. And he talks about 2 key themes in here. One is the zero risk illusion. When we talk about big numbers, we can almost say that it's infinite. So the risk of a fatality in diving is somewhere around the 1 in 100,000 to 1 in 200,000 dives. Wow. That's a big number. I'm never going to get close to 100,000 or 200,000 dives, which means it's not going to happen to me. That's the mental shortcut we take. It's a really big number, so it may as well be a really, really big number. So I'm not going to die. And we have this zero risk illusion. The other piece is that he describes this concept called the turkey illusion. And it comes from the story of you're a turkey, it's 100 days before Christmas, and the farmer's come in and given you a whole bunch of food. You sit there, cool, this is nice. The next day he comes in and gives you some more food. Oh, this is quite a nice place to be. The chance of me getting killed is pretty low. It's getting smaller. And it goes on and goes on and goes on until day 99 you think, wow, I'm like this big because I've eaten loads and the farmer's my friend. Day 100, he comes in with the axe and he goes, haha, guess what? It's all over for you. So the longer that things go right, the less we think that they're actually wrong, that risk is in place. So we start with uncertainty, and he talks about these concepts in the book: stocks, business, health, diving. Massive uncertainty here, and we'll go on to that why in a minute. Risk is something we can measure. We've got dice, and I'll give an example in a minute. Gambling. The casino runs the odds that they win over the long game. They're playing the long game. You're playing the short game. And then we move into certainty. So if things don't, if we end up with a zero risk situation, zero risk means it's certain. This thing won't go wrong in my mind. We take these mental shortcuts all the time. Part of that is based on situational awareness. Is that ability to focus what's important and or relevant, and that's key, this piece here about what's relevant and important, whilst being conscious of and taking into account the limitations of our focused attention. We have a finite capacity to see what's going on. And if somebody throws a distraction, this is what happens. Oh! That's the normal response. Oh! 12 broken ribs and a sternum cracked in 2 places. And people go, idiot, Darwin Award winner. And you sit there and go, that is normal human behaviour. There was alcohol involved, so there's going to be a bit of a... But if somebody throws you or gives you something that is really attention-seeking, who's seen Up? Pixar. Squirrel. People are simple. If you give something that's really interesting, you will focus on it. When you're driving in roadworks area and a sign pops up, even though it's a tight lane area, you look at that, oh, what does that say? Shit, there's other stuff going on. So we need to understand how our attention works, or not, as the case may be, and how we make decisions. There's an author, Kahneman, Daniel Kahneman, wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and he describes in it System 1, which is this intuitive, fast, automatic behaviors. Most of our life is spent, 99% of our time is spent in System 1. We don't think about it. System 2 is the logical thought processes are really hard and you've got to expend lots of mental effort. Humans are lazy, or efficient if you're being positive. We try to ditch as much as we can that we don't think is relevant, and we practice stuff and we get automatic behaviors. Learning to drive a car on that first time with the driving instructor, and you're coming up to the junction, he said, right, I want you to turn left. Oh, right, what was the sequence? Right, I've got to think about this. Mirror, signal, maneuver, then I'm going to start doing stuff, and I'm going to all these things. When you get to automatic System 1 behaviors, and somebody asks you, describe exactly what you do, it's really hard, because you've now ingrained that. System 2 requires mental effort, and we don't like doing that. So anytime we can, we will take mental shortcuts. Another bunch of research that looks at decision making is naturalistic decision making, from a researcher who started off, Gary Klein, and the fact that actually we don't go through this logical decision making process. We don't, if we're given, his initial work was firefighters, they don't come up on the scene and say, aha, it's a fire. And the colour of the smoke is this, and the colour of the flames is this, and they don't go through this logical process. They come up and say, it looks like one of those, and I'm going to fight the fire that way. Oh, it doesn't work that way. And I'm going to go to my next best option. It's called satisfying. Is it good enough? And we do that all the time. The thing is that it takes experience to build mental models to allow you to make quick decisions in short time. The more experienced you are, the more models that you can rely on from that point of view. And so we've got, it's just a picture of a Lego man, a couple of Lego divers. We go through this process all the time. We take those mental shortcuts. We know when we approach a set of traffic lights, the red light's on. The next one's going to be red-orange, and then it's going to be green. And then you go to a foreign country and it follows a different sequence. You're like, ooh. And when we have that sort of mindset, you think, well, this is not quite right. If we have the wrong information, the wrong situational awareness, we employ the wrong model and accidents happen. But that uncertainty is being managed by those mental shortcuts. We have hundreds of biases that are out there. And the link there that I've put at the bottom is on my Human Diver website, but it links out to a Wikipedia page on cognitive biases. There are 175 biases out there that they reckon we are subject to. We don't think about them. It just happens, how we frame a problem. So as an example of that, 3 Mile Island, nuclear disaster, shark attacks. How many fatalities do you think were associated with that? 20? 50? 100? None. 5 attacks about a year, in terms of shark attacks in a year, fatalities. Nuclear power, really scary. And you think about a nuclear accident, you think like Chernobyl, lots of people killed. But actually, how it's framed is differently. Then we talk about general aviation in the States. Where that's perceived as a risk to numbers of people killed, light aircraft flying, about 350, 400 pilots get killed, pilots and passengers get killed in general aviation crashes a year. The problem is that's ones and twos. It doesn't have the same effect, emotional effect. If you crashed 3 regional airliners in a year and killed 400 people, there'd be uproar because you've killed a whole bunch of people in one go. And that's part of the problem in the diving community. There aren't that many people dying, which is a good thing. But as a consequence, we don't think the risk is that serious. Now, from my perspective, fatalities are not a great way to learn anyway, because the decision maker is dead. You can't ask them how it made sense for them to do what they did. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, today is a great day to die. They are trying to do the best they can with the information they've got and managing their uncertainties. So we need to understand that local rationality, and that's by talking about near misses. People go, yeah, I've got intuition. I know what I'm supposed to do. And it can be correct. And this is Kahneman here, who wrote this book. And intuition can be correct, but only if there's regularity in the world. So chess players, they know what needs to happen, and they can look at a scene and make those intuitive decisions. That requires you to build up lots of experience against the environment you're in. You undertake lots of practice, and it needs to be deliberate and relevant practice. Hey, I've got 1,000 dives, I'm really experienced. 999 of those have been in a pool. So how relevant is that to the environment you're in? And there needs to be immediate feedback. You make a wrong decision, it tells you straight away that you've made a wrong decision. A lot of the things that we do in the real world, we don't find out for many days, weeks, years that something wasn't the best thing to do. So we've got to understand that limitation, because if we don't have that, the way our brains work I will just fill in the gaps with made up stuff. And you only find out whether or not it was made up by doing a review afterwards. But those risks or uncertainties that we're talking about don't exist in isolation. And this guy, Eric Holnagel, wrote a book, The Efficiency Thoroughness Trade-off. And what it is talking about, the fact that we've always got competing goals. Time, money, quality, performance. For divers, I only get 5 weekends, 6 weekends a year to go diving. I might get a couple of weeks holiday doing that sort of thing. But the weather's rubbish. How much risk am I going to take when the weather's iffy because I might not get to dive for another 6 weeks? Or the kit, yeah, it's okay, but because I can't afford to fix that bit, or I can't afford to replace the oxygen cell, but there's this fantastic dive coming up. Yeah, it'll be okay. And so this was the smaller picture from earlier, Cook and Rasmussen, talking about the fact that we've got economics. It's healthcare, the healthcare system going bust. They run out of money. And then we've got not enough resources, people, to do the task. And all the time it's pushing towards risky behaviors out this way. And then we've got safety campaigns trying to push things back this way. In the real world, we have lots of pressures on us. And we need to understand that those pressures create uncertainty and they create error-producing conditions. We need to understand that. Because risk in the real world is not done in this logical process where we sit there and go likelihood and consequences. Because how do you measure the likelihood of a risk materializing in diving? We can't. We don't have that data. It's rubbish. And then you sit there and go, okay, these are treating risks in isolation. How many green risks make a red? And actually, this goes back to your own jobs. If you're doing risk matrices, and you sit there and go, that's green, that's green, that's green, that's green. Okay, how many times, what happens if we combine those risks? Ooh, that's difficult. Because our brains don't like that, because we haven't got an ability to take those mental shortcuts. But I'm going to show you why we need to talk about what goes on in our diving amongst the community so we can improve our certainty. So on a single dice, 6 sides, you've got a 1 in 6 chance. It's quite easy. 2 dice, well now actually, we've got a 1 in 36 chance of getting 2 or 12. And the reason why casinos won't allow 7 to be the player's number, or if they are, it's got returned odds, is because it has the most it's the most likely to be rolled with a pair of dice. So they play the game of large numbers. As divers, we don't dive that often with the same variables being isolated. So we try that large number game, but I'm going to run through a little video sequence here of rolling a dice 10 times. Now, you would think that they would be spread out, and you should get an equal spread of the numbers that are there. But actually, it doesn't work like that. It did. There we go. And I think we've got to 10 rolls. If I do 3 people, and they roll those dice 10 times, they've got a different distribution. So this is the same as 10 divers having 3 divers having 10 different experiences each. So how do we make those decisions? Well, let's go diving a bit more and see what happens. So if I roll it 100 times, yeah, it starts to get towards the curve that we're expecting for that normal distribution of the dice. But even then, we don't get exactly the same responses back. So we've still got uncertainty that's there. So let's go for 10,000 and see what happens. It's still not quite there. And this is the thing, is we need to share our experience of what worked and what didn't work. The problem is in diving, how many variables, how many dice are we talking about rolling? And this is what I find quite funny when we talk about gradient factors, where people are nuancing numbers here and there when there are much bigger risk factors that they could be dealing with and addressing to maximize their safety in diving. But that's the shiny thing. That's the interesting thing. Oh, and it's something else that isn't me that I need to change my behaviors. Risk language is incredible. Well, it's incredibly important. So this is a site called Probability Survey. You can go in there and it asks you to define what you think the percentage is. So the top one is almost certainly, ranges from, about 80% through to about 100. Highly likely, very good chance, probable, likely, we believe, probably. That's about 50 to 80%. Better than ever. And then we start getting down here. Chances are slight, and yet they go up to 40%. So when you say to somebody, what's the likelihood of that going? Well, probably. Well, what does probably mean? I've got a view of what probably is. You've got a view. I'm pretty much guaranteed they're not the same thing. So we're trying to manage that. Another part of this is, I'll shout out some numbers here. What's the probability, the possibility of having DCS on a dive? Shout out, what do you think is the possibility of having DCS on a dive? Or partial electronics failure? 100%. Okay, 100%. Anybody else? 10%. Okay, 10%. Possibility. Is 100%. Indeed. Everything on there is a possibility of 100%. Probabilities, they're a different game. Because there's a whole bunch of variables going there, and it's your view of what do you think, because the next thing is, what's acceptable? Has anybody ever thought about this for your own diving? What is the acceptable level of probability for some of those things there? Most people go, well, that's a really hard question to answer, because I have no idea what that is. And even if I said the risk of a fatality is 1 in 200,000, what does that mean? It's almost meaningless to us as individuals when we're trying to play with big numbers. But what we do have is the stories that we can go. And this is a colleague of mine, Duncan McKillop. The job of any human is to be able to predict with 100% accuracy what is going to happen next. Sadly, though, this is an utterly impossible task. So instead, the human has to make a probability-possibility trade-off, where they gamble on the 1,000,001 things that can possibly happen, next, against the 1 or 2 things that will probably happen next. And how we work out what that probability-possibility trade-off is based on previous experiences, either direct, that we've learned ourselves, and they're the most powerful. Then we have our first sort of sphere of influence. Our friends, close friends, they've had a safe, scary moment, or they've had that was not a good thing. All right, what happened? Right, I'm going to change my behaviors. And so we have this feedback reinforces the behavior. So we have human behavior, which is a function of the system. It's not people just operating on their own. If you are in a training system and an organization rewards you for lots and lots of certifications, and your boss rewards you for getting people through the door quickly, is quality going to be at the top of your priorities? If you get rewarded for quantity and not quality, human nature says we'll do quality. So we then look at what's the probability of an adverse event. Wet finger in the air time again. And actually, nothing happens. That is an outcome from an activity. So we have a consequence, and then we go back and say, if I do that, nothing happens, cool, we'll carry on doing that. So this is this normalization of deviance or risk homeostasis. We reset where we take greater risks based on what we think is an acceptable level of risk. We make something safer, and then we go to another level of risk. We can look at this in rebreathers. The number of, say, 100-meter wrecks 15, 20 years ago on open circuit. Now look at the number of 100-meter dives being done on rebreathers. That shift, yes, it's accessible to go and do this, but the hazard is still there. It's all going to go horribly wrong if something goes wrong down there. So we have this bit that the normal conditions take this operating point outside the accepted margin without an accident. So we start to drift. And then what happens is we have one of these safe, scary moments. You come back from the dive and go, whoa, that was not a good thing to do. I need to pay attention more. Great. How do you pay attention more? You need to know where you failed the last time so you can look at the right thing. You have a fixed attention span. So let's point it in the right direction. So we take some corrective action, but after a while, we start to drift and we get closer to this sort of failure line. Now this dotted line is now reset and is going to be our normal behaviors. We're going to start to take greater risks. The problem is, as humans, we don't judge or look at things in absolutes. We look in things in relative terms. So if I've got a performance, a standard here, and I drift a little bit and I make a new standard. And then I operate and I drift a bit more, and I operate and I drift a bit more, and so on. And then you have an accident and somebody goes, but you went from here to here. And you go, no. I only went from here to here. I was only deviating that much, because that's what we reset as our standards. And we need to keep each other accountable in that context. So that becomes the norm. Now, that's how innovation also happens, and exploration happens that way. But it's done in an informed manner with feedback. Now, I was chatting with Becky Kagan-Schott 3 weeks ago, another conference like this, where she talked about diving on a short notice media task. It was an unknown target. They'd been asked with a couple of days' notice to go out and take part of this documenting this wreck. It was in around 75 meters. She'd never dived with on that wreck before. She dived, I think, once with the person that she was going to buddy up with, and there was another cameraman with 2 other divers. And they went down, and she'd actually the day before gone through the plans and said, I'm not going to push the limits of the bottom time. The producers wanted 40-minute bottom time at 75 meters. And she's like, I haven't got enough bailout gas for that. I am not willing to take that risk. So she cut back her bottom time to 25 minutes, which the guy that she was filming with was happy with. So they went down there, they finished the filming, and just as they left the bottom, she looked at her handset, and it basically had no PO2 information at all, and the head-up display had gone as well. And in 12 years of diving rebreathers, she'd never had anything like this before. A total loss of electronics. So she bailed out and ascended, and I was chatting to her, so, well, was this something that you were expecting? Or, you know, had you had similar faults before? And she went, actually, in the summer, that summer, there were lots of little erratic issues in terms of the electronics. And I changed out the head-up display, I changed out the handset, the electronics unit, the batteries. Most of the time it was fine, because the only way you can prove that you fixed the problem is to go and dive it. But she's also a commercial camera woman. And not having the unit means that she doesn't get money. And even worse, if you go on a job and you have to bail out because the kit doesn't work, you're not going to get asked back again. So understanding when we talk about those pressures this way, pushing risk across to the left of the screen as you look at it, it's understanding that. Now, that was a 2-day job. This happened on the first day. She sat there and went, now what do I do? I've still got another shoot, another day to do tomorrow. And she spent that evening 6 hours taking apart all the kit, trying to test it, and decided, because it was a CAN bus unit, a rebreather, she took out the HUD and replaced it with a handset. So she had 2 handsets to go diving. It's like, okay, I'll see what happens. So they went dive the following day, and it worked fine. Now the task and workload went up, because instead of having the head-up display giving her the symbology or the PO2 information, now she had to check the handset, so workload went up. But in her mind, everything had been fine, even though there was these little niggly faults. But it's okay. I'll deal with that uncertainty. I'll manage the risk, because what's the worst that can happen? A total electronics failure at 75 meters with an hour and a half of deco above you to then go on open circuit. Now, for the ascent, it wasn't a problem for her. She's a trimix instructor. Spends a lot of time doing these drills, and when the students bail, she bails as well. So she's used to doing those sorts of things. But it's the first time it happened for real. So actually that feedback we can now have the other way. An adverse event happens, and then we get into this next bit. What's the severity probability? How bad is it going to be? Consequence, and we go back up to changing behaviours. And this is something that Becky related, was the fact that when Agnes and Yasuko died, it was both in the same year, and Becky was 29 as well. Both of these ladies were 29 years old, both solo diving, and this changed her attitude to, maybe I need to dial back where I'm going and the risks that I'm willing to take. Now the challenges are, when you're in a commercial environment, the pressures to make money are very real. For divers out here who do it for fun, most people are more time limited than money limited. And especially diving in the UK where the weather is pretty unpredictable, you book 1 weekend a month, and then you get blown out on those 2 weekends, so you haven't dived for 3 months. And then you get on the boat and you're going out there and you're sitting there going, no, I think I can deal with that fault. And it is really hard to say no. Anybody can thumb a dive at any time for any reason. Well done. That is such an easy thing to say. In reality, it is much harder to do that. Especially if you're going to dive with a team or a buddy pair, and if you don't go in, they don't go in either. And now you sit there and go, oh, I'm going to let that person down. I'm not going to say that there's an easy solution to this, but you need to be aware of how we make decisions in uncertainty. Now, hindsight bias doesn't help that learning, and this is not hindsight bias, but it is hindsight. So the quote at the bottom is from Hidden QC, Queen's Counsel, following the Clapham Junction inquiry, where two trains collided, a number of people killed, and the quote from the inquiry is, "There is almost no human action or decision that cannot be made to look flawed and less sensible in the misleading light of hindsight. It is essential that the critic should keep himself constantly aware of that fact. After the event, we have 100% certainty about what's going to happen. In reality, you don't have a crystal ball. You sit there and go, yeah, I've seen this before. It's okay. I saw somebody do that the last time, and this is how we're going to solve this problem." We don't do these things logically. We do them through emotions, through mental shortcuts and heuristics. I'm in the process of writing a book. It'll go out next March. And I asked some people to submit stories. And a cave explorer came to me with a story which I thought was brilliant about managing uncertainty. So he's going to survey, solo dive, scootering, going to go a long way into a cave. And because he's surveying, he's got his equipment slightly configured differently in terms of survey tablets, plates, and the reels that they're going to go out and explore a little bit more as well. So it's a long way, they're scootering, and there is a bit where, and he's on his own, that they follow the line, and it goes through a sort of zero-vis section. So he's doing touch contact, following the line out, into the cave, following it. And then clears the zero-vis section, and off they go scootering into the cave. On the way back, they know that this zero-vis section's there, and sure enough, it arrives. So clips back the scooter, holds onto the line, and then basically does a touch contact exit, following the line as expected, and then the line starts to go into the silt. And it's like, oh, okay, keeps on going, until the silt is now shoulder deep. And it's like, oh, I can't do anything now. So it's like, I'm not sure what's going on, because this isn't how it was on the way in. Massive uncertainty. So he backs up until the line comes out the silt, leaves a marker, clips the scooter off, and then says, right, I'll get my safety spool, and goes to reach for it, and it's no longer there on his harness. So he's like, now what do I do? There's my exit to go out to fresh air, but I can't see where it's going to go. So he sits there and goes, the only option I've got is to let go of the line and hope that I can swim through this zero-vis bit and out the other side and pick up the line with wherever it is. So he does. So I'm quite practiced at swimming in a straight line. So he swims and he swims and he hits the cave wall and there's no line there. It's like, okay, this isn't good. I will do a really careful 180 and he swims back blind still at this stage. And he comes across the scooter and the marker. It's like, that was good. Right, I'm going to offset a little bit more. And he swam back into the zero-vis to where to go. And he comes out the other side and the line is there. He finds the line. And as he's swimming out, he's basically, I'm going to come back for those bits tomorrow. I'm not going to go bother getting those for the moment. And as he's swimming out, he went, I could have swum back into the cave, further in. I could have cut the line and wrapped it round a survey plate or a spool that he's emptied, and then I could use that for my safety spool. But he hadn't thought about that because it's not something that had come to his mind. And that's why I share these stories. Now, interestingly, the reason why this happened, the line was tied to a stalactite in the cave on the roof. And it broke off, and it fell down, and it sunk into the silt. And it's still there as far as he knows. And it's this bit of, you don't know what you don't know. My initial, when I normally tell this story in a smaller audience, when I say that he let go of the line and went to swim blind through the silt, normally everybody goes, what? And then I go, and what would you do? Yeah. Because hindsight's dead easy. But you're in that real situation where actually you've got to calm your nerves, and the panic, you've got to keep it down from that perspective. Panic is caused by uncertainty that you just do not know how to resolve. So how do we go about minimizing uncertainty and its effects? Well, by having standard protocols, processes. I'm a member of GUE. I'm the director for risk management for GUE. We get a lot of grief for being standardized. Here's the rules. You've got to do this. And the thing is that if you've got a standard-based organization, people know how they're going to respond in uncertain situations. So we have a stable, high-risk system, a high-reliability organization. They operate really close to the line, and they know, well, they don't know exactly where that is, but they know how they're going to predict. You've got like a really safe organization. They've got a bit of a grey area, and they sit way back here. They're not taking a lot of risk. And then we get groups who don't have any standards. They want to take risks, and they don't know how they're going to respond in uncertain situations. Sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's bad. Debriefs. Something that comes out of my classes that I teach is, wow, we need to do more briefs and debriefs because this is how we learn. And you sit there in a positive way about improving. What did we do well and why? And that's the important bit, why. What did we need to improve on and how we're going to fix it? It's not just about identifying the lessons, it's about learning them, putting something in place. And those questions apply to the individual and the team. Checklists. The idea of a checklist is to slow you down. People go, oh, it takes too long to do a checklist. Really? At what point in your diving is 90 seconds that critical? To read through something and say, yep, check it. And this point here, this Shishikanko, Japanese train drivers, touch, point, say. Because now you're engaging different parts of your brain. Reach back as part of a rebreather checklist, oxygen's on. Yeah, it's on. No, touch it, rotate it, and then read the gauge and make sure it's there. And read out what the numbers say. But I'm going to look stupid. Not as stupid as being hypoxic, unconscious in the water because you didn't turn your oxygen on. And that's happened quite a bit more recently. And the other part of this is when people fail, they don't want to talk about their failures because the diving community is rubbish. What they do is they bend down, they pick up a rock and go, ah, idiot. That was obvious you need to turn your gas on. Yeah, I know. But it can't have been that obvious because I got in with it turned off. And we've got to hold each other accountable to that. And when somebody says, have you done your checks? Don't go, yeah. Who are you to ask? Oh, hang on a minute, I forgot. So think about why those checklists are there. But time is never that critical. If it is, you need to change your plan. Telling stories. The context-rich stories out there of how and why it made sense for you to do what you did. What the pressures were there. What were the drivers? How are you managing that uncertainty based on those mental shortcuts that you take? Medical insurance. That's a great way of dealing with it. In genuinely having insurance to treat you because you can't get rid of all of the risk. There will always be a residual risk and something might go wrong. Now, the reason why I say teleports don't exist, I've got Dan Insurance. Awesome. I'm in the middle of the Pacific. Oh yeah? Now what are they going to do to get you off that boat? So dial back the risks that you're taking. And yes, I'll tell the story of this one. So a diver they were something like 36 hours offshore by boat. The diving company were basically operating 3 boats so that they could, if there was an issue, that one boat could go back. So they'd sort of have them staggered at sort of 2 or 3 day intervals. So if there's an issue, they'd always be able to put one back and not completely trash the whole week-long or 10-day trip. Diver goes diving, comes back on, has symptoms, signs and symptoms of decompression sickness. So he goes on oxygen. Symptoms clear up. Goes diving the following day. Comes back and has now had a spinal bend and actually can't feel below waist. And his bladder doesn't work anymore now because he can't actually control his urination. They phoned back to the UK and they managed the case, which requires him to be catheterized. And there was no catheters on that boat. There was on another one, and they don't know how sterile that was. Neither of the 2 first aid trained people on the boat wanted to do the catheterization. So the doctor in the UK had to teach the wife how to catheterize her husband and let his bladder flow before it burst. They then spent time traveling back, and he spent something like 6 weeks in that area being treated in a chamber before he was flown back to the UK, to Europe. So just because you've got medical insurance, it doesn't give you a get out of jail card that says, haha, cool. Think about where you are and where the chambers are. In Florida, I think they have 1, maybe 2 working hyperbaric chambers for the whole of Florida state. And yet it's a big cave diving area and there's loads of wrecks off the south coast as well. So think about that. And the next bit, life assurance. Hands up who has life assurance that covers mortgage or your family in the event that one of you, that you die and you've got some money that goes to your family. Okay, how many, keep your hands up if that covers diving. Okay, so the rest of you who don't have life assurance, you may have some, may not have family, but you go, oh, well, I go diving, so I can't have life assurance. What's to stop you getting hit by a bus? That's a much greater risk than having an issue when you go diving. But there are products out there, and I'll give a plug to Simon at Scuba Financial Services through BSAC, that they will manage, they produce or provide cover for divers. And what they're talking about here is they will have standard cover, whatever it is for your age. And if you're looking at, as it says here, £100,000 of cover, it would cost you a surcharge of £100 per year. Now, the surcharges, depending on your qualifications, there might not be any loading at all on top of normal life assurance cover. Or it might be £200 a year. How much do you love your family? If you die, I would say the majority of men in here, and not being a sexist bit, most males are the breadwinners in the family. That's why a lot of lawsuits happen, because the person that's left behind no longer has any money or can't afford the house. So this is the ultimate failing safely, making sure that whoever's left behind can deal with it. And it's all very well saying, it's my risk to take. I get that. But there are people who are going to bring your body back onto the boat if they can find it. And then there are friends and relatives left behind going, thanks. Don't be selfish from that point of view. So, from my perspective, there are the barriers and defences and the bits that you can do afterwards. And that's what I try to provide, plug for my stuff at the end. A book that I'm writing, which you can get, is a free 60-page ebook that's available from the Human Diver. And then I do online training and face-to-face training, which is all about high-performance team training, about situational awareness, decision-making, teamwork, leadership, communications, and understanding the impact of stress and fatigue, because those impact our mental shortcuts. And if we understand how humans work, we can manage uncertainty in a much more effective way. To that end, I'll take any questions.